some mortality. Look at this. Holloway just told him, stand right here. Oh, big connection late. With 1 second to go. Gaethje face first on the canvas. As Holloway wins the BMF title. Oh my goodness.
I want my title next, Joe. That's what I came over here for. One thing and one thing only. So I don't care if it's Raquel. I don't care if it's Juliana. By the end of the year, I will be UFC champion.
This is the UFC 300 post show with Tom Albano, Zain Bando, Pat Danna, and Brett Cagle on the Empty the Bench Podcast Network, presented by Playback.
Shout out Nick Morgeson for creating that intro that mentions some of the sounds of last night's card, because my God, what we witnessed last night, Zan, was something that will never be forgotten. What we witnessed last night was one for the history books, not just of the UFC, in mixed martial arts. We talked about if this card was going to live up to the hype. Oh, it did, and then some.
Oh yeah, it did, and some and so much more. Thank you guys for tuning in on this beautiful Sunday morning, at least where I am. It's 80 degrees in the Chicago suburbs today, and I guess it's fitting considering that 300 was meant to be a sunshine and rainbows kind of card, and it definitely lived up to the billing. And I am certainly happy to be back. You and Brett did a great job holding down the fort on the pre-fight show yesterday, and it's good to be here for the post-fight show. And it definitely was one of my best cards in terms of picks, going 10-3 last night. So overall, it was a very successful show, and I'm excited to break it down even further because there were a lot of elements to it. There was a lot that happened, and I just want to give a quick shout out and kudos to the UFC production team. The way they were able to preserve the history of the sport throughout the entire broadcast last night was second to none. The way they were able to institute Face the Pain before the televised prelims was perfect. The Phil Collins in the Air Tonight intro for the pay-per-view was unbelievable. Like, everything that could have gone well with this card did, and it was just cool that it went off without a hitch because, you're only going to get one UFC 300 numbered pay-per-view, and I think that's as good as it was going to get, and anyone who missed it, I feel supremely bad for you. So,
yeah, I mean, I had a look at the poll we put out, like, at the end of the card yesterday. I want to know who the one person or so was that voted just good and not great, because I question what MMA fan does not select great when it comes to a ranking system of great, good, meh, and poor for this card, because this card delivered, like I said, it delivered and then some, because there was I had mentioned Zan. My prediction was, not a prediction, a comparison. I said UFC 100 between the milestone pay-per-views. UFC 100 was the better card. UFC 200 more of the star power. And I think this card took both of those, combined them, and then blew both of them out of the water.
Yeah, I think so too. And what's crazy is that not just the milestone piece, but just the evolution of the sport was something to behold. I mean, if you look at UFC 100, we had the heavyweight championship fight between Brock Lesnar and Frank Mir before there were women's divisions, and then you had UFC 200, which ended up being headlined consequently by Misha Tate and Amanda Nunes, and then the UFC 300 we had a co-main event, which was the biggest fight in Chinese women's MMA history. So it just goes to show how much the sport has evolved, how bigger the sport has become, and when in terms of blowing it out of the water, I don't even think it's close. I mean, we had the most champions on one card that we've seen in a while. We had 26 different fighters from all different disciplines, ranging from a Penn State All-American wrestler to someone who has been in the sport for a long time and has represented Hawaii with class, and Max Holloway. There are a lot of elements around it that it's made it that much more special. And blowing it out of the water, I don't even think it's a question. I think it did that and then some, and it was awesome. It was really cool.
Absolutely. All right. Before we get into deeper dives into anything, make sure you hit that like button, subscribe, hit the notification bell so you get notified of everything here at the Empty the Bench Network. Make sure to follow us across social media, Facebook, X, and Instagram at MMA Outsiders ETB. Make sure to follow the network, Facebook, Twitter, X, and TikTok. Pardon me, Facebook, X, Instagram, and TikTok at ETB Network. Shout out to everybody who are watching this live stream on our Facebook page, our X page, the network's Facebook and X pages. Shout out to all of you. Make sure to go to our YouTube home, youtube.com/ETV network for that's our base home. We're at 700 and I believe 30 subscribers right now. So we're continuing that climb. So help us continue to grow. Don't forget to go to etvpodcast.com for more information about the network, blogs that are just being pumped out left and right from some of our contributors. Don't forget, obviously, this is a live stream, so no audio version, but make sure to take the MMA Outsiders on the road with you for our normal episodes, wherever you get your podcasts. Acast, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, so much more. To my right, as always, Zain Bando, my co-host, BJPenn.com writer, MMA Knockout writer, Anton Albano, contributor at MMA News, Fanside at MMA, and the PFL. Make sure to follow Zan at Zambando99. Make sure to follow me at Thomas Albano. All right. So a lot that we have to break down here. We're going to go fight by fight like we did yesterday with myself and Brett. Unfortunately, Brett's a little too sick to be here today, so he was not able here. But Zan has recovered, so it is the original duo.
Yeah, I've recovered to like the 87% range. We're not 100% there yet, but I figured that I felt well enough and I slept well enough to where I'm like, okay, hey, let's make it the original OG duo and do this today. So I'm happy to be here. And even the UFC 300 only happens once. This is a stream I just can't afford or to miss. So that's why I'm here. So yeah,
Fair.
absolutely. It was like it's old time's sake, and we're back in the early stages of August and September of 2022 when we didn't we know what we were doing and we were just trying things out. So it's good. It's good to see.
For sure. All right. Now, before we get into the fights, I mean, Zan, there was one other thing, and the one criticism I have for this card is I think considering what happened at the press conference, it might have been better if, as John Anik was doing his little goodbye stuff, you had the outro, and then I wish it would have just started playing the Foggy Dew or Hypnotized by the Notorious B.I.G. to officially announce the breaking news: Conor McGregor versus Michael Chandler. Done. Confirmed. It took till the press conference. There was a lot of scare that this fight was not going to get announced. But fortunately, at the press conference, Dana White let it be known through a note being passed. I don't know how. I don't know why they did it at the press conference. I didn't know why they didn't do a video package for this or anything. But McGregor versus Chandler is going to happen. UFC 303, International Fight Week, June 29th. He also announced the confirmation of a couple of fights that we talked about. Well, at least one fight that we talked about, and that UFC 302 on June 1st will be headlined by Islam Makhachev defending the lightweight championship against Dustin Poirier as a result of and that's a result of Armin Sarukian and Max Holloway coming out on top in their fights, which we'll talk about. And then the co-main event, I don't know how this is gonna play out, Zan, but but 302's
I
co-main
don't
event
think anybody. I don't think anybody knows.
5 rounds between Sean Strickland and Paulo Costa. What?
Yeah, it's definitely strange, but New Jersey into New Jersey. It's in your backyard. My dates and when I'll be in Brooklyn are still to be determined, but it's a very enticing weekend, that's for sure. And then, as you know, Conor McGregor being back in Las Vegas is close to my heart because I was there at his 40 a trilogy fight, so it gives me a lot to think about on the potential attendance for that one. It also gives me a lot to think about because we've all been waiting for it. It's been over a year in the making since this fight was teased originally post the Ultimate Fighter. This feels like one of these announcements that maybe Dana would have made in 2004, 2005 after a major pay-per-view where he reads the paper. So it felt a little bit old school in that regard, but at least the fight is done. We don't have to talk about it anymore. And Unfortunately, Michael Chandler is a little pissed at me because I'm picking against him, but it should be a good one, and it should be one that the fans will remember for a long time. So I'm excited for it. We can officially start the countdown. We can start teasing it. We can do everything we need to do in order to make this fight the biggest it can. But now we have a date. We have a countdown and the excitement to
We've got
MMA.
2.5 months.
We got 2.5 months until MMA's unofficial Super Bowl, which I think everybody is excited about. So,
Absolutely.
regardless of if you're going to be in Vegas or you're going to be at a house party with a bunch of your friends, it's going to be a weekend to remember. It's going to be a date on the calendar you'll never forget years from now, and it's going to be an absolute blast.
Absolutely. And we'll talk more about it on the next edition of the MMA Outsiders. I'm just curious, Dan, how they're going to, because we talk about with the UFC scheduling and everything. We talk about the star power of McGregor, and we talk about how we just have this New Jersey main and co-main announced. We're only less than 2 months away from that card. I'm wondering how these two cards, Dan, are going to have undercards built around them. Worthy undercards, I should say.
Well, unless the undercards are already built and nobody knows anything about them, that could also be the case too. So
For, for sure.
because if you recall during the new glove announcement launch, Dustin French, who works at the UFC PI, did make it very clear that starting next week, all the fighters on the newer card were going to be notified of this glove change and whatnot. So therefore, a card is either in the works or built. The public just doesn't know what the card is yet.
Fair
That's
enough.
what I that's what I think.
Fair enough. Like I mentioned, we'll talk more about this on the next episode 80 of the MMA Outsiders, because no disrespect to McGregor and Chandler, but that's not why we're here. We're here to break down the card that actually happened in the Octagon this weekend. I should say last night. We're not out of the weekend just yet. Uh,
No,
ma-
and fortunately or unfortunately, depending on how you look at that sort of thing. But yeah, you're right. You're right.
all right, main event: Alex Pereira pulling off Zan. What I have to say is one of the coldest and possibly one of the funniest knockouts I've ever seen in a while. First round starching of Jamal Hill to retain the light heavyweight title. Uh Pretty basic kind of fight. You saw some leg kicks. You saw Pereira start to work some of his punching, and then the fight the fight ending sequence. And I mean, Pereira gets hit low on the cup. Herb Dean goes to step in and call for time, and Pereira just goes, "No, no, no, I'm good. I'm good." Wallop, and Jamal Hill's eyes rolled into the back of his head, and then some ground and pound, and the ref stepped in.
Yeah,
Alex Pereira's something else.
it's definitely one of the craziest knockouts you'll ever see, and it left the crowd in a frenzy, and I think there was a lot of shock. And yeah, did I or did I not say when you were reading off my predictions yesterday that Pereira was going to knock out Jamal Hill? That's exactly what he did.
Right, but you and I thought maybe he'd go 2 rounds, three. He didn't need 2 or 3 rounds. He
No,
just
he
got him
didn't.
done right out.
No, he didn't. You're exactly right, and that's the crazy part of the sport is you just don't know. And Pereira is just a special individual. You can't train for a guy like that who's so physically built, and his legs are like tree trunks, and you don't know what he's going to throw at you, and you don't know what feints and angles he's going to throw at you. He is a wild man, and he definitely has reinvigorated MMA in Brazil at a time when there really weren't too many Brazilian champions, and now he and arguably Charles Oliveira, even though he lost last night, we're going to get into that fight in a little bit. He and Charles Oliveira might be the two biggest stars out of Brazil at this current juncture in time. So he has a lot to be excited about. He has a lot of options right now: middleweight, light heavyweight, or heavyweight. The sky's the limit for him, and he's one of the most underappreciated champions in the sport. But now that he's officially defended his belt, there's no question who the real champ is. And last night's fight proved it. Pereira has a lot of options in front of him, as I just alluded to, and the rest of his reign, assuming he fights a couple more times this year, is going to be very, very exciting.
Absolutely. And now comes the question, Zan. I mean, he made the claim last night. He was looking for a push. He wanted, he said in the weeks leading up, pardon me, not even the weeks, in the day after his fight with Jamal Hill was announced, he said, I'm winning in an easy fashion, and then I'm going to headline the UFC 301 in Brazil. And it looks like Zan on the surface that, hey, he got it done in easy fashion. So I throw the question out there of, can he? Will he? But then came number one, him in the octagon saying, oh, I want to fight at heavyweight, and kind of hinting that maybe he'd want, if he did such a thing, he'd want an interim title fight with the Tom Aspinall, the interim heavyweight champion. And then you also have basically John Anik and the commentary team saying that he may have broken a toe or something during the fight with Hill, which, I mean, on one hand, I want to say it's just a toe, but on the other hand, I can't help but feel like this shouldn't be happening because, not because I don't think Pereira should. I feel like for all intents and purposes, Pereira should be there in Brazil. We've talked about how this fight, maybe it should have been scheduled for 301, but at the same time, I don't think the UFC, I think the UFC, pardon me, I think the UFC, Zan, is focused. They are set on Tom Aspinall headlining Manchester in July.
Well, well, I think so too, and I think it's one of those things where they're caught in a conundrum. But I will say this: I don't think the quick turnaround is going to happen. It's less than 6 weeks away. He has to still get fully medically cleared by the commission. I'm sure, as he already has. I'm sure he has, but I think it's too quick of a turnaround, and you're risking potentially losing a fight that arguably you have no business being in, just considering you just defended your light heavyweight title, and that's the belt you should focus on. You shouldn't try to go up a weight class unless you've cleaned out the light heavyweight division, which he clearly hasn't.
Which he
So
hasn't.
I don't think A, he deserves it, and B, it makes logical sense given that the card's already built. Pantosia's at the top of the card against Erstag. You don't want to take that opportunity away from both of those guys when that's been the main event confirmed since about early March or so. I just don't think it makes a lot of sense timing wise.
Yeah, I don't think it makes a lot of sense timing wise either, especially if we're talking about him fighting for the interim heavyweight championship because, as I mentioned yesterday, you got Magomed Ankalaev who's waiting in the wings for a potential title shot. Yuri Prohaska after his performance against Rakic. I mean, maybe he deserves a rematch with Pereira at some point down the line. There are fights to be made in the light heavyweight division, and Zan, also what's something I mentioned yesterday with Brett, we finally have stability at the light heavyweight division, which is not something we've had for a little while now. It's not something we've had, I'd say, at minimum since Prohaska had to vacate the title due to injury in late 2022.
I would say it was even before that. When Jones was beating
Usually when
Anthony
Jones vacated.
Thiago Santos and stuff like that.
Mm.
Yeah, I would say pre-COVID.
So we finally have some stability in this division. I don't think we can afford Pereira moving up and then all of a sudden risking any of that stability now,
I don't I
the
don't
newfound stability.
I don't think so either. And it's one of those things too where you have to look at it also from a holistic perspective. Like, okay, if Pereira moves up to heavyweight again, or if Pereira moves up to heavyweight for the first time rather, you're holding up the division again. Which I feel like it's been a stop start division ever since mid 2020, early 2021, and you don't want to have that keep happening. So
Zan, considering the news of uh Aspinall, considering the news of Alex Pereira winning here, and it looks like Conor McGregor, Michael Chandler for 303, and it's Islam and Dustin for 302. My question then becomes what, and we could talk about it a little more on the MMA Outsiders in a couple of days. What do you think they do now with Leon Edwards? Do they book Leon Edwards as a co-main for Manchester, or did they do something else in August or September at the Sphere in Abu Dhabi in late October?
No, I think Edwards is the headliner for the Manchester card. That's what I think.
So you think Aspinall is going to be the co-main event?
No, I think they're gonna move the Aspinall fight to a different date. That's
When
which
you
I don't think now with all the shakeups and stuff, I don't think they do the Aspinall interim heavyweight title fight in Manchester. I think it's either the co-main event at the Spear or it's gonna be done in Abu Dhabi. Because now the Islam fight got moved, so now the only thing you can do is you have to have an international main event as the headliner in October.
I mean, I guess, but it depends who Aspinall's opponent is. Like I've talked about. If it's Cyril Gahn, how do you not do that fight in Europe?
No, I don't disagree. But now with all these announcements, I think they're gonna make some changes that the fans may not be happy about. But one guarantee that I do have, whatever the placement may be, is Edwards is going to be fighting in Manchester in July. That's
Okay, okay. Do you think it's going to be against Bilal?
yeah, absolutely. There's no other choice. The
Yeah.
UFC can love Bilal, they can hate Bilal, but he's the guy who deserves the fight.
Well, especially now that they put Chimaev against Whitaker for the Saudi Arabia card,
Right, exactly.
which means there's only one of two logical options for Leon Bilal, and it's 302 when it takes place in New Jersey. I know we've talked about Bilal's a Chicago boy, but raised in the tri-state over here, or 304 with Leon having the home field advantage.
I doubt they would add the Bilal Leon fight to 302,
Oh,
given
well,
that
but they're not gonna do that now that Islam Dustin is the headline.
right.
So at this point, it's looking like 304, unless there's some other plan we don't know about.
Right, or it could even be 304 or 306. Not 306, but 308 in
Hmm.
Abu Dhabi.
For sure. Also, want to give a very quick shout out, by the way. Forgot to do at the start to our new network sponsor, App Playback. So again, the MMA Outsiders is presented by Playback along with the rest of the network. Watching sports is more fun with others, but we spend too much of our time watching alone. Playback is a virtual space where communities can stream live sports together with everyone perfectly synced up. Creators can hop on stage, deliver their own play-by-play analysis and commentary, and invite viewers up for Q&A. Playback makes watching sports fully interactive and a social experience. From playing fantasy sports, repping your favorite players and teams, and watching the commentators and communities you care about. Win or lose, sports are best enjoyed together. Join our community by going to playback.tv/GTV network to find out more, including our live stream schedule. And I mean, we were there for the first live stream on the 11th, which was a blast with all the basketball that we were watching. We do have plans to do some play-in games this coming week for the play-in tournament. Obviously, today marks the last day of the NBA regular season.
That's
Uh,
correct. Yep.
so Bulls are going to be in the play-in tournament. The Knicks today they've got at least the 3 seed locked up. They're going for the 2 seed. So it'll be a lot of fun to figure out, and then we'll do live streams with the playoffs. Zen, you, Pat, and I will be doing an NFL live stream in the days coming before the draft. Yes, the MMA Outsiders will be doing a different sport in a couple of weeks' time.
Yeah, that'll definitely be fun. It'll give us some new legs and something to talk about we haven't really discussed before. So be sure to tune in to all of that and so much more as we have some exciting stuff coming to Playback as it is a platform on the rise. And once they get every sport together in order, it should be a platform that should be very fun and there's a lot of possibilities. So
I mean,
stay
Zen,
tuned.
now that 303 is confirmed McGregor Chandler, there's a lot of possibilities we could work for June.
Yeah, we might have to figure out we might have to figure out in June if there's a potential UFC off weekend, and that's the weekend where we do all the tape study and then release it the week before the fight.
That would be that
We could do that too.
we could
But
that would be fun.
there's a lot of possibilities. So for those of you who have not looked at our playback stream or looked at playback as a site in general, be sure to check it out because it's a different perspective on sports, and we'll try our best to give you some things that you can't find anywhere else. So,
For sure. All right. Co-main event, Weili Zhang, one-sided decision. I mean, Zhang, she kind of won twice in this fight because the first round she ends up choking out Yang Jianan, but somehow Yang Jianan was able to make it to her feet, make it back to the corner. Otherwise, that fight would have been stopped right then and there. And then everything else afterward. I mean, I gave Yan one round. I think it might have been 3 or 4, but everything else was all Zhang. It was just
3.
yeah, it was round 3. You're right. Uh, it was pretty much dominant from there, though. I mean, Weili Zhang put on a hell of a show. She had one obviously Zhang, the first round should have been scored 10-8, at least in my eyes it was. You could even say maybe the second round could have been a 10-8 as well with how dominant she was at the start.
Yeah, I mean, this was a wild fight. Obviously, the first ever China versus China world title fight lived up to the billing for sure. And this was one of those fights where you didn't quite know what was going to happen, but you knew that if Wei Wei could use her wrestling and use her grappling, she would do well. Obviously, she nearly finished Yan in the first round or Yang Chonan in the first round, but still, it was one of those fights where you were on the edge of your seat the whole fight because you didn't know what was going to happen. And Wei Wei is just a beast. So this was a great fight for her. And this was even a better showing for Xiaonan. I'm sure stock rose just because the fight was so big and she was able to hang in there after the first round. There's a lot to be excited about in the strawweight division, but now you have to look ahead to September 14th at the Spear, Noche UFC 2, Grasso, Shevchenko 3, and the winner of that fight, in my opinion, deserves Wei Li for a super fight somewhere down the line in December or January of 25 because that's the biggest fight in women's MMA that you can make at this very moment in time. And I think it sets up a lot of different possibilities for a potential trilogy and a mix and match of all 4 of those different fighters. It should be very exciting.
Yeah, absolutely. As you kind of said, and as I've kind of talked about, I think I said it with Brett yesterday. This kind of sets up the opportunity that
Oh,
you
yeah,
could have Whaley face the winner of Grasso Shevchenko 3 in a women's super fight for the flyweight title. Give Whaley the chance to
absolutely.
be champ.
Absolutely. Which would make her probably top for the greatest women's MMA fighter of all time if that happens.
Pretty much, yeah. All
Yeah,
right,
I would
let's
say so.
let's talk about the big one.
Yeah.
This I think even above those 2 title fights, this is the story. Max Holloway. I entered this fight and I was scared of how he would look at 155. But Zan,
You were scared. And I was one of the few people who's a part of the show that was confident that Holloway would win this fight, and the rest of you guys disagree with me. I just had a feeling that it would be a vintage Holloway performance, but please continue.
yeah, but the thing is, he actually looked really good at 155. He looked like he was not drained at all when compared to when he faced Poirier 5 years ago. And he and Gaethje put on a hell of a performance. And it was Holloway. We talked about how it was Gaethje and his wildness and his output versus Holloway's technical prowess when it comes to boxing. And it was
Right.
Holloway who was getting the better of it. Because I think Holloway did something really smart, Zan. You know, for all the times that, he rocked Gaethje, but he never rushed in. And it left like Rogan in DC questioning why didn't he go in for the kill there. But the thing is, what Gaethje can bring. We've seen the wild punching that Gaethje has, and if Holloway had rushed in, and that's no play on words considering his son's name is Rush.
Right.
But if he had rushed in, Gaethje could have clipped him, and we could have been talking about a much different fight ending than what we've got here. Instead, Max Holloway ends up being technical, picking his spots, ends up doing very well. And there was concern about how Gaethje was using the leg kicks very early on in the fight because that was Holloway's weakness when it came to the fights with Volkanovski that he lost. But it ends up being such an incredible fight, such a wild fight. Both guys landing their shots, both guys having moments. Obviously, Max had the fight momentum swinging shot at the end of the first round, the spinning back kick that broke Gaethje's nose, and then just one of the most beast moments inside the octagon I've ever seen. Him going to the center with the fight won, basically, and saying, let's throw down, taking such a huge gamble, and then landing a shot that face plants Gaethje with literally 1 second to go. This is the performance that legends are made of.
Yeah, I mean, this was to put it simply. I mean, the only thing I could think of was this is the UFC's version of like Hagler Hearns or Gotti Ward 1. I mean, this is one of those ones where you remember where you were when you saw it, the shock on everybody's faces when he landed the shot. Like it was just awesome. I mean, it was a vintage performance. It's like these two guys were back in like a backyard brawl, and they were just seeing who would land the other first, and Holloway won. I mean, it was awesome. I mean, it was you couldn't get a better BMF title fight than that, and you have to give credit to both guys for just sitting in the pocket and just giving it everything they had out there. I mean, it was awesome, and to do it with 1 second left in the fight is just even more majestic. I mean, only movie scripts can write that, and that's literally what happened. And
That's
you just
exactly
have
right.
you just have to give credit to both guys. I mean, there was one winner in this fight. Holloway did come out on top, but this is one of those fights where you just felt like both guys, you know, gave it all at maximum effort, and it's one of those clips that you'll replay over and over and over again and say, how in the world did this just happen? But that's the sport. That's the game that's played, and you have to give Holloway all the credit in the world for finding the opening and picking his best shot and then winning the fight.
And even Dana White had to admit something that we've talked about, and I think I talked with Pat and I talked with Brett last week, that, maybe Holloway versus Gaethje, as much of it being a BMF title fight, maybe it should have been the headliner, because after this fight, and Dana White even admitted at the post-fight press conference, the sales out of everyone was just gone. Like, there was exhaustion while watching the women's title fight. There was exhaustion watching Pereira's knockout of Hill. Like, there was nothing as funny as the knockout by Pereira was. There was just nothing that either two of those fights could do that was going to be able to top this. And it's just absolutely bonkers how, I mean, congratulations to Max Holloway, though. $600,000. We talk about all that, oh, people are going to walk away with $300,000, and Holloway just goes, yeah, no, I'm going to take a performance bonus, and I'm going to take a fight of the night. And saying,
Yeah,
if there is, I'm going to, so Dana White at the press conference said, if there's a better fight of the year nominee by the time this year ends, I'd be afraid to see it. Zan, I'm going to go one step further. If there is a better fight of the year nominee and a better knockout of the year nominee, I'm going to be afraid to see it.
yeah, I mean, I think you and thousands of other people feel the exact same way. It's going to be very hard to top that, but we're not even near the end of quarter one, going into quarter two, so there's still a lot more to go. But yeah, that one is going to be tough to beat.
I mean, Zan, already, Max Holloway has done in one fight a knockout of the year nominee, a fight of the year nominee, on a card that's going to be an event of the year nominee. Zan, in one fight, in one legendary performance, Max Holloway may have already made himself the first fighter of the year nominee.
No kidding, and he has a potential big fight in the horizon with Ilya Taporia, and there's a lot to be excited about for a career that looks like it was on the downswing after 3 losses to Volk, and now he looks like a totally different fighter. So
And Zan,
it's good to see.
did you see Taporia's face when the camera cut to him?
Oh,
Like,
I did. I
it
did.
did not look like he wanted that.
Oh no, absolutely not.
So now comes the question of, will they do that? Will they risk? We talked about this when Ilya won the title. Will they risk their new market in Spain? Will they risk a potential new star in Ilya to give Max another title shot?
I don't understand exactly how it would be a risk. I just think it would be the next most logical fight.
I do too, and I mean, Zan, in all fairness, I did say, they had to book Ilya versus Max in order to uh increase Ilya's star power, because if they wanted to, all the hyperbole they had about Ilya when he won the title, it's like, okay, he beat Volk. Now you've also got to be Max. And before Max gets out of his prime, he's still 32.
Right. Which I think is something that a lot of people are forgetting. So he still has a couple more solid years left, at least 4. So
Yeah. And then maybe if Aldo wins his fight and Ilya beats Max, maybe you give Ilya the legacy fight and give him Aldo.
which would be something that if you would ask me that 2 years ago, I would have been very confused.
I know, I would have too. I still found myself confused saying that. Uh Moving on, Zan, to the other portions of the main card. Armin Sarukian, decision against Charles Oliveira, lightweight title eliminator. You know, like I said, this was a grappler's paradise, and I think Armin Sarukian really showed, that he is ready to potentially be in there for a title fight against for the performance he put on against the former champion like Charles Oliveira.
Right. What's what's amazing to think about though with this fight is you didn't quite know what Armin Sarukian you were going to get. And even though people thought his performance was boring, he did what you needed to do against a guy like Oliver to win. He beat him in his own games. There's nothing you could really say from a complaint perspective where he fought horribly. He really didn't. It just wasn't the most exciting fight. That's all it was.
Yeah, it wasn't the most exciting fight. I found myself a little disappointed that it didn't talk about, it didn't show the beauty that was jujitsu and wrestling in terms of Charles Oliveira and Sarukian's specialties. But I think, at least, like you said, Sarukian did enough. He made his point. He got the win. And now nobody can argue that he is a top contender in this game. So now it's time for Sarukian. Either you got to put him in another fight with another one of these top 5 beasts, or you got to give him a title shot not too long after. But of course, you know, Dustin Poirier's knockout of Benoit Saint Denis last month shook things up. Max Holloway being Gaethje tonight shakes things up. Sarukian kind of shakes things up. So at this point now for the lightweight division, all eyes are on 302 in Newark, with Islam Makhachev facing Justin Gaethje. I mean, pardon me, Dustin Poirier. Um, I mean, if Makhachev gets Poirier out of there rather quickly, like we saw, him do to Oliveira, like we saw Pereira do to Hill tonight. Is it possible that Makhachev can turn around to Abu Dhabi and at the end of October to face a Sarukian?
It's hard to say. We might be running into a Sydney situation. So the best thing I would think is you would hold Islam until January. That's what I December or January.
I mean, that's fair. It's just, how the heck is the rest of the card going to play out? It may have to be December if you really think about it, because they'll need something for Vegas at the end of the year if that's the
Well,
plan.
unless it's another Conor McGregor fight based on how the Chandler fight goes.
That's true.
There's a lot more question marks that won't be ironed out until post IFW. That's what I think.
Yeah, or at the very least until we get a main event announced for Manchester.
Right.
All right. Also on the main card, Bo Nichols, second round submission to Cody Brundage. Bo looked pretty pissed off with himself. Dana White needed to calm him down afterwards.
Yeah, I mean, Bo Nickel, I don't like to use this word lightly, but it seems like he wants to be the literal best in the world. And if that's not him being exactly perfect, he probably doesn't think his performance is
It
that.
reminds me, Sam, of Kayla Harrison a few years ago in the PFL.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, absolutely. She was not satisfied unless she was literal dominant from the second the fight started until it was over. Nichols the same way. There's no fault in that, but he did what he needed to do. He beat a guy that just, to me, it's not that Brundage didn't prepare. I just think Nickel, his All-American wrestling skills, being from Penn State, winning the Hodge Trophy. There's a lot behind it that makes him the scariest guy or one of the scariest prospects at 185. So there's a lot to be excited about for him. He started out 300 on the main card, whether he liked it or not, but he did what he needed to do in a big spot, and that's all you could really say. And the people booing him, they just don't understand. It wasn't his fault. So
Yeah, no, I mean, he got faced with a little more experience than he's faced in the past with Cody Brundage. And if he wants to be a star, he's got to face the tougher competition.
yeah, which I think he knows that, and he's still young in his career, so they're giving him a slow build. We'll see. We'll see where he goes. I don't think he's ready for the top 15 yet, but he's
No,
darn near. He's down near close. He's
you
close. He's like 2 fights away.
do like I've talked about, Zan, in terms of like building somebody up. Do what they did with AJ McKee and Bellator. Just continue this slow build right now until we feel like he's ready for top 15 competition. He's still young. Let him continue to develop as a fighter, but before you throw him in there with the top contenders at middleweight.
Right.
Uh, Going back to light heavyweight to go to the prelim card. Prohaska taking home the other $300,000 performance of the night bonus, pulling off this stoppage of Alexander Rakic. And like I said, has maybe Prohaska secured a potential rematch down the line with Alex Pereira? I think so.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And he even admitted he wanted to fight the winner of the main event. So hopefully, when the time comes, whether they do Pereira Aspinall, that's another option too. He and Prohaska. So he's definitely ready for it. He's ready to potentially get his belt back, and there's a lot to be excited about with the 205 division. There's a bunch of big fights potentially on the horizon, and he's definitely in that mix, no doubt.
For sure. It was a pretty dominant, powerful performance.
Just
Uh,
a quick update while we're here. Just ran the tallies really quick. You and Pat finished with identical records, which puts your overall record time at 87-65-3. Pat currently sits at 98-62-3, and with my 10-3 performance yesterday, I am now 85-75-3. So I'm a bit on your tail for a second here, but now our picks tracker is getting good as the middle of April turns to the end of April and into early May. What are your thoughts on our current records at the moment?
I mean, I had a really shitty performance on the early prelim card, so I'm at the very least. Beggars can't be choosers. I will take the 8-5.
Yeah, you went 8-5, and that included a 1-3 mark on the early prelims, so not great. But you did well enough to rally, and you did okay on the main card. I expected more from you. I thought you were going to go at least 4-1. You went 3-2, but yeah, I guess in your position you would take 8-5, 10-3. I was really surprised about it. You have to remember I won 7 in a row at one point in the middle of the
Yeah,
card, and I had a couple of perfects. So uh, there's that. I'm pretty proud of my current record at the moment, but it's nice to know that I'm at least 2 fights closer into second place when it looked like I was in the gutter at 68-67-3 just a week and a half ago. So it's crazy how
yeah,
just
you've
like
rallied
football
back in
Friday.
some way.
Yeah, just like football Friday, it's crazy to think that one week, one card rather can change everything. So just wanted to give a quick update that I am on your tail for second place in case you didn't know that already. So
Oh, I knew. I knew. All right. Aljo. I mean, yeah, just like what we talk about with Bo Nickel. People may not like it. Dana may not like it. He did what he needed to do. He took advantage of Calvin Cater, pardon me. He took advantage of the game that he has, which his dominance is in his grappling, and he made Calvin Cater look like he belonged in a different minor league.
yeah, it was definitely the worst I've seen Gator in a long time, maybe ever. And Sterling just looked like a totally different fighter in a completely different weight class and still looked like the same Aljo. So he's definitely a threat in that division at featherweight now. And it's going to be interesting to see where he goes from here, given that he's up 10 pounds. But he's definitely a threat for sure for a potential title shot, maybe early next year, somewhere in there. But definitely a dominant performance.
Good. I gotta say, Aljo, it's not gonna be a title I mean, I'm going to agree with you, but it's not going to be a title shot right away. I think they're going to feed
No,
him.
I know that's why I'm saying that he'll fight once more, and then there'll be sometime next year where he'll potentially get a title shot.
I wonder if maybe down the line, like next year, so they do something like, well, because you say a title shot, they do something like a Holloway versus Sterling.
I could see it, even though a couple of years ago it would have been very unlikely, but now it looks more likely than ever, for sure.
I know, all of a sudden now that matchup's in my head and I can't get it out. It's an interesting thought. Uh, the big story, I think, of the prelims, though, is the UFC debut, the long-awaited, anticipated debut of Kayla Harrison, and man, did she deliver and then some. I mean, I was surprised at first, like she was. Holly Holm clinched up with her and actually managed to reverse her and with a takedown. But then Kayla Harrison, I mean, that was such a mistake by Holm because Kayla Harrison got right on top and got to work right away.
Oh, actually, we just had a question come in
Oh yeah,
from the X chain from Nick Morrison. Was it odd that Aljamain Sterling didn't get a post fight interview? I think it was simply because of timing. What do you
yes.
think?
Did Dana's hate of Aljo play a role? Maybe a little bit, but you have to realize by the time that the Aljo fight ended, it was already 9:30 Eastern. They had to get Yuri and Rakic in there because by that when you think about what the UFC's production is and the timing out of everything, the fight wasn't going to start till between 9:37 and 9:42, which means if that fight had gone the distance, they would have been pushing it for pay-per-view time.
Right, and you know that the pay-per-view has to start right at 9 p.m. with the intro beginning at 9:06, which is exactly what happened. So,
Right. That's part of the UFC's pacing and their format.
yep,
So yeah, I'm not gonna read too much into that.
me either. Good question, especially if you're a newer fan of the sport that maybe has just started to tune in the last couple months and you don't exactly know how the production process works. That's the exact answer right there. So,
hmm but I do understand some more seasoned fans' perspective of how it comes off as disrespectful when you consider the hatred that it seems like some people, including potentially Dana, have given Aljo over the last year or so.
well, that could be a factor too, but there was no either guy coming out and saying that they hate one another after the fight. So
Right.
it's, it's
But my point being that regardless of the hate or not, it was already 9:30. They had to move on to the next fight.
right,
I mean,
exactly.
think about it, Zan. The pay-per-view actually ran long. The pay-per-view ended at 1:30 Eastern, closer to 2 Eastern. I mean, it could have
Oh,
been closer to 2 Eastern if the fight had gone long between Pereira and Hill.
well, thanks for telling me because I crashed during the walkouts of Pereira Hill and then woke up at 6 a.m. to find out that Pereira had won, which is all I care heard about. I just wanted to make sure that Pereira had won because I took him. But yeah, that's definitely interesting to know that it went super late, which is one of the reasons why, unless I was given an amazing opportunity, I refuse to watch the UFC on the East Coast because I do not understand how you guys do it. And the two times I have done it, the timing has been awful, and I did not go to bed until a very unreasonable hour. So, uh, kudos to you for staying up, and I could not do that, especially if I was living on the East Coast. Living on the West Coast, though, that must have been awesome. Getting to go to bed at like 10:20 last night. So,
Which right. Well, that's why our old friend Johnny Zan, whenever he mentioned a football game about that, start at 9 a.m. Eastern, UFC would basically be an example of like, oh, you get all the preferred time treatment when it comes to
right.
some of the special events. Basically the argument was if we could stay up on the East Coast till 1 a.m., especially and think about those guys over in England. And I have a bunch of colleagues over in England who probably had to stay up to like 5, 6 in the morning for that.
Yeah, some maybe even longer if you factor in all the post-fight stuff, so it's crazy.
So
But
so when these
and
football games happens and overseas, it's like, those people on the West Coast can get their ass up one day at 6 a.m.
and it's someone who was just at the Final Four, and it's someone who was in Arizona who doesn't do daylight savings, watching the championship game on Pseudo Pacific time with tip-off starting at 6:20 was unbelievable. I loved it.
Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
yeah.
West Coast for combat sports, the West Coast always seems to have the best kind of timing.
Oh, for sure. Although the West Coast fans will not be happy next week because PFL card starts at 5:30 local in Chicago, so they're not going to be happy about that. So
I mean, you get home for work and then you get to crash on the couch and watch some MMA. That's good in my book.
that's true, but my point is that they'll be late for the first few prelims though.
Okay, fair enough.
By the time they get home. So
Fair. Let's go into the other fight. San Diego Lopez, very quick finish of Sadiq Youssef, and I have to say, you know, even in that loss he had last year in his UFC debut against Steve Alev, between that and the 3 fights he's had since with 3 spectacular finishes, I think it's pretty clear the UFC sees something in Diego Lopez, and he's got some potential in there to be a star.
oh, for sure. I think the next thing you do with him is you put him on Noche UFC 2.
I would love to see him on Noche UFC 2.
That's the next thing you do, and you make him the opener of the pay-per-view. That's what I think.
I love it. I love it.
Hey, I'm no official matchmaker or anything, but to me that makes the most logical sense. It'll get the crowd hyped up right away. That's what I would do.
I love it. Renato Moicano, I'm sorry. As much as Moicano won this fight, Zan, I think Jalen Turner lost this fight.
He really did.
The botched walk-off knockout, I get it. You wanted the $300,000, but, you don't call the fight.
No,
The
you don't.
referee calls the fight.
No, you don't. You've seen too many of those instances where a guy walks away, puts his arms up, and gets caught.
It's happened. Okay, not that getting caught, but a failed walk-off knockout almost happened to Chris Cyborg, where she ran across the cage, started to celebrate, and then there's Steve Mazzagatti saying, "I never called the fight."
That's true. That was like 15 years ago, but yeah.
I know I'm old, so you don't have to remind me.
No, I know. As am I. I remember that fight.
But yeah, I mean, Money Moicano. By the way, I left my ass off because Money Moicano goes, "I'm not gonna do the speech," and then proceeds to do a speech.
Yeah, but what was funny was just given that we're also a podcast too, the way he shouted out his Show Me the Money podcast was just awesome.
And I like how he said, "Joe Rogan, you're gonna be my guest. No questions. You have to be my guest. You have to come on the show."
That's awesome. And yeah, shout out to the guys at Home of Fight. I'm sure that they were having an absolute blast last night.
I love it. What a perfect closer for the early prelims in Renato Moicano.
That's their guy. You gotta love it.
And I mean, as far as Jalen Turner goes, I mean, dumb, and dumb.
For sure. Now that we're on the topic of Moicano, did you see the hilarious clip of him botching UFC fighters' names? It's so funny. It's so funny.
He's been quite the talent. Ever since the end of 2022 when he took the mic at Madison Square Garden, there's been something with him. It's been unbelievable.
Yeah, he's probably the most popular prospect in the whole sport at the moment, just given his antics. I think the only reason why people tuned into him is just to hear the post-fight interviews.
I think that's the reason why they book him. I mean, obviously he's a hell of a talent anyway, but still, that's what people look forward to is his post-fight interviews.
It's truly remarkable.
And to think, Zan, when he was losing to the likes of, Jeremy Stevens and Shansung Jung and Jose Aldo, it's like, okay, maybe he's a Brazilian name who's just going to be unnamed, a body at featherweight and lightweight. And all of a sudden, he's blossomed into something else.
Oh, for sure. Absolutely.
It's crazy how the sport is sometimes.
I want to see him fight Patty Pimblett now. That's the fight I want to see. That's the fight everybody wants. Yeah.
Well, there's a certain somebody else who's called out Patty Pimblett, who we'll get to in just a second.
Oh, I know.
Before we do that, let's talk about Jessica Andrade getting the win over Marina Rodriguez. Agree or disagree with the split?
The horrible split decision call, but at least the right fighter won.
Yeah. This one was a give or take. I mean, it wasn't the most exciting fight, but I feel like Andrade did win this one.
Yep.
Moving right along. Is there anything else you want to say, or do we want to move right along?
I mean, it's good for Jessica to get back in the win column. She struggled the last few years let's see how the division plays out before we start booking her against top flight competition that she used to compete against.
Oh, yeah.
It's gonna be a while.
Oh, yeah, no, it wasn't a impressive enough performance that I'd say title shot, that I'd say number one contender fight. She still needs another couple of fights.
True, and just wanted to give a quick shout out as we wrap up the stream here in a few minutes to the 60 souls that are
Yeah, we have
watching.
been climbing today.
Yeah, that's the 60 souls that are currently watching or listening to the stream. We shout out every single one of you. Thank you for tuning in on this Sunday morning. We couldn't do it with you guys, so thanks for listening to us banter and rave. It's been fun.
Absolutely. Let's go to the person who did call out Patty Himlet, Bobby Green, putting on a hell of a fight with Jim Miller. I mean, I give Jim Miller all the credit in the world. 100, 200, 300. I mean, at this point, Zan, I say, maybe give Jim Miller one more fight, and then maybe it's time to call it.
Probably. I mean, he wants to get to 50 fights, but in order for him to do that, he probably needed to get a win last night, and didn't help his cause. But he's just such a stud in there. He gave all of his best effort, and Bobby Green has really emerged as someone who doesn't have the flashiest name in the sport, but is very exciting and is starting to use his mouth a little bit more. So I think the more impressive he looks, the more people are going to care, and it's definitely he's definitely someone in that division to behold, even though he's been in the UFC for a very long time.
I mean, Zan, Jim Miller is at 55 fights, so maybe give him one more, and then he can ride off into the sunset. I mean, Jim Miller has
He's in what 55 MMA fights, 43 of them in the UFC or something like that.
something like that. It's insane. He's spanned across the generations. Ever since, when did he debut? Like 2006, 2007?
No, UFC 89, which would have been 2008, October of 2008,
Okay,
against Matt Danzig.
But my point being, he's a guy who's been here a long, long time, has come across plenty of talent. Top talent, bottom talent, everybody. So you got to give credit where credit's due. Jim Miller is an A-class fighter. I mean, in terms of the fighter level, like we've called Holloway and Whitaker the quadruple A, I think Jim Miller might be the triple A, beating everybody below him or unranked, but when facing ranked talents, that's where he gets to struggle. But you can't discredit Bobby Green, because Bobby Green, Zan, is not too much younger than Jim Miller. And here he is, ranked number, with his own renaissance, ranked number 14. Maybe he's even going to be ranked 13 or 12 by the end of tomorrow.
Yeah, it's wild. It's wild how crazy this sport is, how longevity can really play a factor. If you were to tell me Bobby Green would be ranked in 2024, all the way back in 2017, I would have looked at you like you had four eyes. I would have been like, what?
Zan, you do have four eyes. I do have four eyes normally. I just don't wear my glasses on the podcast.
I actually didn't. I actually didn't even read. Oh, I see. You learn something new about somebody every single day. That's very interesting. I know. I had no idea.
Wow. Okay. One other thing. Davidson Figueiredo submitting Cody. Oh, by the way, the Patty Pimlet call out. Yes. No. What do you think?
I like it. I mean, you have to take your chances where credit's due. Patty Pimblett's a much more popular name. A lot of people want to see Patty Pimblett get his ass kicked. Sign me up for that. Sign me up for that for International Fight Week. It's the perfect prelim main event on ESPN.
Wow. You think Bobby Green will turn that around that quickly? 2.5.
Yeah, I think so. Oh, as well as Patty Pimblett can sign the contract on the dotted line. There's no reason why that fight doesn't make sense next, for sure.
Oh God! Then you're gonna put Connor and Patty on the same card.
Yeah, it would be wild.
Add Molly McCann to that too.
Yeah, no kidding. Oh, and if you want, you could add Cage Warrior stud Paul who's to make his UFC debut on that card if you really wanted to.
Fair enough. I like it. Davison Figueiredo submitting Cody Garbrandt to open the show. I mean, Zan, Figgy is now 2-0, wins over Rob Font and Cody Garbrandt. I know Cody Garbrandt's not the Cody Garbrandt from, the ends of the 2010s, but I mean, Figgy with the performances that he's had, I think he's ready for a number one contenders fight or something like that at bantamweight.
Yeah, most definitely. I mean, Figgy's been a workhorse for the last several years. Has been a mainstay in the lighter weight divisions. Beat a former champion and look good doing it. There's no reason why Figgy shouldn't be fighting top flight competition until he loses again. So yeah, I'm good for whatever he wants to do next. All I know is that he has a chance to be a champion again, and I think he can do it within the next 2 years. So we'll see. We'll see what happens.
Beautiful. All right. Make sure to tune in to the episode 80 of the MMA Outsiders this Tuesday, 7 p.m. Eastern, 4 Pacific. We're going to be talking a lot about, we will recap some of UFC 300. We'll probably point people back to this stream. We thank
Yeah.
everybody who took the time out to watch this stream. We will definitely talk more about Conor McGregor versus Michael Chandler. We'll talk about some of these fight announcements. And then, of course, we got to preview two things we got to preview. Number one, you and Brett are going to be in Chicago this week for the
Yep.
PFL card.
We're excited about it.
And then number two, we got a big boxing match coming up in Brooklyn on Saturday with Devin Haney and Ryan
Ryan
Garcia.
Garcia. Yep.
I think it's amazing that this fight managed to stay through till fight week.
It's crazy. And it's crazy to see that when I got the Fight Week media schedule as one of those people on the list, to see that, as you just alluded to, the fight's going through and Ryan Garcia's name was listed everywhere. It's wild that the fight's happening when it's on. It's happening Barclays Center in Brooklyn on Saturday. Excited to preview it for sure. And it's live and exclusive on DAZN worldwide, if that means anything to any of you. So
it means basically. I think my DAZN, I canceled it in the 6 months. I don't know if I'm gonna have access.
yeah, good point.
Oops.
Good point. I guess
Put better fights on DAZN. Put more than just Haney Garcia there.
I mean, I guess you, I guess you could use my login to save a trip. I guess I don't know.
Oh well. Make sure to hit that like button, subscribe, hit the notification bell so you get notified of everything here at the Empty the Bench Network. Follow us across social media at MMA Outsiders ETV and at ETV Network. Thank you all who are watching this live stream on our social media pages. Don't forget to go to youtube.com/ETV Network, just past 730 subscribers. Make sure to take the MMA Outsiders on the road with you, or wherever you get your podcasts, Acast, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, so much more. Big shout out again to Playback, the new network sponsor. We will be doing some play-in games this week. The NBA season officially wraps up today, so at some point tonight or early tomorrow, you'll get our official schedule for the play-in tournament. I'll be a part of at least one of those. Nick Morganson will be there. Paul Lombardi from the 3&D should be there. Should be a fun experience. Don't forget to go to etvpodcast.com for more content. A lot of blogs that have been coming out. Shout out to all of our contributors on that side. It's been absolutely fun. And yeah, Zan, UFC 300 is officially in the history books in more ways than one.
It is. It's officially in the history books, which means the real UFC 300, I guess, is what people are dubbing it as, very similar to UFC 202, is about 2 months away. So we're excited to bring you everything that's going to be one of the biggest months of June in the history of the UFC, arguably the biggest month of June. But until then, and so much more, and he's Tom. Thank you for tuning into this very special live stream that was UFC 300 Unrivaled Greatness, aka Burr versus Hill. We will see you guys next week for tons of more fun content. And until then, enjoy the rest of your weekend, and we'll see you guys later.
We'll see you later. Unrivaled greatness indeed.
Yes, sir.